Our ancient and historic monuments often have ancient and historic ghosts to go with them. You can even find them listed in the guidebooks. So far, so good for the tourist business. Our story tonight concerns one such historic site. The occasional tourist would leave terrified after a brief encounter with the supernatural, but that could always be put down to an overheated imagination. But what was more perplexing was the behavior of the overnight visitors, level-headed friends of the family. They often refused point-blank ever to spend another night in the place. They were seeing something that wasn't in the guidebooks. They were seeing the wrong ghost.
Muncaster Castle. Since 1325, it has stood on the northwest coast of England, built to guard the ancient trade routes going south from Carlisle and to watch for invaders coming in from the Irish Sea. The Pennington family have been the lords of Muncaster since the 13th century, when Alan de Penetone was granted the lands of Muncaster by King John. In recent years, the family and friends have been plagued by strange happenings within the walls. Doors open and shut of their own accord. Unknown footsteps walk the corridors. Patrick Gordon Duff Pennington has lived at the castle since he married into the family, but even he feels uncomfortable at times.
Going up in the winter, between the back door and my office, come snow, come hail or shine, every night footsteps used to follow me in the dark in the winter, and I didn't like it one little bit. And the dogs don't like it much either. I've always thought this house was a fairly normal house, but just lately it's become extremely strange.
Horticulturalist Alan Clark also had a bad experience at Muncaster.
Had a quick look outside, nobody there at all. I then found it was quite difficult even to shut the door.
But things didn't stop there for Alan Clark that night.
You hear the expression of the hairs stands on the back of your neck, stands up on the back of your neck, and I never really believed it. But this really did sort of happen.
Until now, the hauntings at Muncaster have been blamed on the spirit of Tom Skelton, otherwise known as Tom Fool. He was the jester at the castle in the 16th century, and his portrait now hangs in one of the corridors of the castle. By all accounts, Tom Fool had a sadistic sense of humour.
He used to sit underneath the chestnut tree that's outside this front door still, which is 600 years old. And when you came and asked the way back to London, if he didn't like the look of you, he pointed you down to the quicksand instead of over the ford.
We'll never know if Tom Skelton really did send travellers to their deaths in the sands, but one thing is true. Just below the castle, along the River Esk, quicksands do appear at low tide. Legend states that Tom was also responsible for the gruesome murder of a carpenter within the castle grounds, an act he carried out to win favour with his master, Sir William Pennington. Tom Fool's presence pervades the castle. It's at its most disquieting by his macabre portrait. A scowling Tom Fool, he stands beside his will, a document that predicts his own death by drowning. One tourist had a frightening experience while looking at the painting.
He's an evil-looking man, isn't he?
She was convinced that she'd heard footsteps on stone, a claim that surprised the local investigator into the hauntings.
When I interviewed her, sometime after the experience, I pointed out to her that the stairs and the corridor were indeed fully carpeted. And she'd never actually realised this, even after the experience, and she'd thought that she'd had a strange experience. She'd never actually made the connection between the stone footsteps and the fact that that wing of the castle is fully carpeted.
The tales of Tom Fool and a headless carpenter make for a good ghost story. But can all the bumps and bangs in the castle really be attributed to a 16th century jester? More recent incidents seem to have nothing to do with Tom Fool. More disturbing than anything that's gone before, these experiences centre on this room in the castle, the tapestry room. James Cartland is an archivist and a family friend of the Penningtons. In the early 80s, he was invited to stay at Muncaster. His hosts put him up in the tapestry room, in a wing of the castle now little used.
I'd heard this sort of strange, difficult to describe it. It was a sort of, as if somebody was talking, but muttering, sort of strange sound. I can't really explain it. I stuck my head up the chimney. I thought, well, it might be the wind in the chimney, but it never is. It was a very, very quiet night, very frosty and quiet. I was the only person in that wing of the castle, so there was nobody else there to make a noise. Absolutely the only person. Everybody else was at the other end. And went back into the room, and it was still going on. And it was more audible by then. I mean, it was definitely a child crying and somebody talking to it, as if a child was ill or something like that. I got back into bed. I never slept a wink. Terrible night.
Unknown to James Cartland, a teenage girl had stayed with her mother at the castle a year earlier. Now a trainee solicitor, she prefers to remain anonymous, but her experience is recreated by actors. The late Lord Carlisle had a similar experience, which he recounted to an ex-curator at the castle.
Lord Carlisle told me that he'd only once stayed in Muncaster, and that time it had been in the tapestry room. And he'd woken up in the middle of the night with the sound of a baby crying in the room, and there was no baby in the room. He said he's never been more terrified in his life. And he was a man who got the MC in the last war, so he wasn't a man who was easily frightened. But he said nothing would get him to stay in Muncaster again. That was one thing that was quite certain.
No one testimony is proof that Muncaster is haunted, but to investigators, these accounts over a long time add up to an impressive case.
Muncaster not only makes the grade with the witnesses' testimonies, it far surpasses the level of criteria that you're looking for, which basically revolves around the correlation of stories over a vast period of time, or even at the same time if you had a collective experience. Without prior knowledge, that's the key. The only other way you could explain it would be mass collusion, and on that scale, spanning decades, from people that no way ever met each other.
So if Muncaster is haunted, who or what is doing it? In particular, who were the children said to be crying in the tapestry room? It was James Cartland who may have stumbled upon the answer.
I came across some old plans, and I discovered that when the castle was altered in the middle of the 19th century, the room, the tapestry room, had been part of the old nurseries, and that those rooms had been cut up or altered in some way. And so I immediately thought, my goodness, those children lived in those rooms. They were the nurseries. It's rather unnerving.
Could the tapestry room be haunted by the cries of children? Certainly the Pennington family had their share of tragedy in the 19th century. Gamel Augustus, the third Lord of Muncaster, lost his only child, Margaret, when she was 11 years old. She was buried in the family church, just a short walk from the castle. Phillida Pennington doesn't know how her distant relative died, nor is she certain that Margaret slept in the tapestry room where the children's cries can now be heard. But she does remember the words of Annie Preston, whose family worked at the castle in Gamel's time.
Annie Preston, who was a lady who lived in the village, who died last year, aged 92, told me that her grandfather put Margaret Elizabeth, the daughter of Gamel, Lord Manchester, into the family tomb. She was the last person to be put in there. And also he said that she had screaming fits before she died.
As a result of these inexplicable events, Muncaster Castle now finds itself catapulted onto Britain's most haunted list. So much so that the only guests willing to spend the night in the tapestry room nowadays are paranormal investigators. Good night.
The clock's ticking, that meant the bombs. But I'd also had this photographic equipment, and it wasn't until after the explosion that I learnt that the building that was destroyed was a store where the RAF kept their photographic equipment.
But was it really such a surprise? Terrorists had attacked 4 military targets in just over a month. Chris Robinson's premonition about Stanmore Park could have been just a lucky guess, or coincidence.
What about this vehicle, Mr. Robinson? What about this yellow and green vehicle?
It could be just 1 in a billion chances. For instance, plane crashes. Statistics show that there's 1 major plane crash in the world somewhere every 2 weeks. Coincidence can indeed explain away many cases. To me, I think that Chris Robinson's results are beyond coincidence. He's certainly come up with many interesting cases of things that are most unlikely to occur. And these interest me because they're not trivial things.
Dan Eldon was only 22, but already a brilliant news photographer. He'd grown up in Africa. Covering the war in Somalia, he was taking pictures of an attack by American helicopter gunships when a Somali mob turned on him and killed him. What wasn't known at the time of his death was that a few weeks earlier, Dan's mother, Kathy, had been warned by Chris Robinson that her son was in grave danger.
Chris was very concerned and came over to my house with a dream that he had had about a swarm of bees around my family.
She then told me that her son was in Africa, and I said to Kathy, I fear that the problem could be him, so please tell him to be careful.
Up to that point, no journalists had been killed. And I believe that Dan, with his streetwise aspect in Africa and the fact that he was friends with so many people, that he would somehow make it through.
The images Chris Robinson saw made his fears for the young photographer grow. But he couldn't see enough to prevent what was about to happen.
Chris talked with a close friend of mine on the weekend before Dan was killed. He had a number of images that he couldn't make sense of. 4 dead photographers, in a seaside place, salt water will damage the lens. F4, rescue me, Kathy. Afterwards, it just makes so much sense. It's frightening. Talking about cameras, telescopic lenses, 4 dead photographers. There were indeed 4 who were killed. Salt water affecting the lens. They were in Mogadishu, which is a seaside town. And Dan, the day before he was killed, was photographing women Marines in bikinis on the beach in Mogadishu. The f4 is the kind of lens that Dan was using. Rescue me, and Kathy. That all makes sense to me.
Some would say Chris Robinson's dreams make sense only with hindsight, but the premonition of Dan Eldon's death turned out to be uncannily accurate. Chris didn't need hindsight for his next premonition. He was so sure it would happen, he was there when it did.
I'd had a series of dreams about an airfield, and I wondered why this was, because I had no plans to visit an airbase or anything. And in the dreams there was rockets, there was aeroplanes, there was explosions in the sky.
What did it all mean this time? Chris called his contact at Bedfordshire Police.
He then described seeing these rockets going up in the sky and then colliding, and these crowns coming down.
In Chris's next dream, the crowns became parachutes. Suddenly, he knew what was about to happen.
All these dreams made me realise that there was going to be a plane crash.
But where and when? The following morning, he phoned a friend, national newspaper astrologer Penny Thornton. He'd just heard about an event taking place that day.
Chris was very enthusiastic about going to an air show, simply because it somehow confirmed or affirmed to him the imagery of two planes crashing and fireworks and the parachutes descending, which he'd had in his dream.
I decided to go. I had to go, really. There was nothing else you could do. I mean, I'd seen it all happen in advance, and I had to go there and know whether it was going to be real.
Chris immediately set off for Fairford in Gloucestershire and the world's largest military aviation display, the International Air Tattoo. One of his premonitions was about to become reality in front of his own eyes.
I was absolutely convinced that this was going to happen. I wasn't sad or upset because I knew that the pilots of the planes came down safely on their parachutes. The people that were with me said, "My God, you know, nobody can survive that." And I said, "Oh, no, don't worry. In my dream, they come out on their parachutes, there's no problem."
Two Russian fighter planes collided today above tens of thousands of people at an international air show in Gloucestershire. Both pilots ejected and were only slightly injured.
I was at the right place at the right time, but how did I know in advance? The pilots didn't.
Those who've heard Chris Robinson's premonitions are ready to believe that he can foretell the future. Tragically, the clues to photographer Dan Eldon's death didn't add up in time. But since then, Chris has been able to help Dan's mother in another way. Cathy Eldon is a former journalist herself and wary of believing what she knows she wants to believe. But she's been astonished by the messages Chris has relayed through his dreams, messages only her son could have sent.
He said he wanted money raised for the charity which was going to be named after him. He talked about film in his camera, where to find negatives that we had lost. There was just this sense of tremendous life and joy that radiated out of this character, and it made us all very happy to think that he was still around in such a positive way.
After Dan Eldon's death, those remarkable pictures were gathered together and published as a tribute. And proceeds from the book go to the charity which his mother, Cathy, did set up in his memory. Probably more reported sightings of ghosts in the British Isles than anywhere else in the world. According to those who claim to have seen them, they come in all shapes and sizes. Most of them haunt old buildings, repeating the same action over and over again, trapped in time and oblivious to what surrounds them now. Poltergeists are something else. They haunt people. The word poltergeist means noisy spirit, and they make their presence felt. Behind a street in Cardiff, down an alley, the quiet life was about to be shattered.
We started in this building about 15 years ago, repairing all sorts of grass cutting equipment, and later on we started to sell mowers.
John and Pat Matthews, helped by Pat's brother Fred, ran a thriving business here. No real worries, just ordinary, everyday irritations.
Two fellows hanging off of him.
And steam coming out of his ears. You know, that must have been one of the closest matches I've ever seen. It's those blasted kids throwing stones. I'll go see to them.
Tell them I'll throw them on the roof if they do it again.
John went to catch the young vandals red-handed, but there weren't any vandals. The stones seemed to be coming from nowhere.
Pathetic, John. Haven't you got any control over them?
There's nobody out there.
Pull the other one. Come out of thin air, did they?
Baffled. We were baffled that there weren't any kids around here and nobody that could throw stones. We just couldn't understand it. We just couldn't understand where they were coming from.
I thought he was a nutter, to be honest. I thought he was mad. I thought people throwing stones, it's got to be. Can't be anything else.
And I started to get worried that there was something strange here in this building.
Whatever it was about to move in at Moa Services.
I would see little things flying across the room.
Used to just throw stones and things like ball bearings.
Then suddenly, in this one corner of the shop, it got ice cold. And then there was a terrible smell of burning.
Somebody, or something, seemed to be playing childish tricks, like hiding keys.
We searched high and low for these keys. It went on for 5-10 minutes or so. Then all of a sudden these keys came shooting across the floor.
Then money began appearing.
Every morning it got in turns, we were having it in turns. Each had a £5 or £10 note and then stuck in the ceiling tile.
Unable to believe that one of them wasn't responsible, the family set up a test.
They said, close the doors, both sides, and we'll see what's happening.
Right, come on then. We're going to settle this once and for all. Hands on the bench. Fingers touching. Right. Come on then. Throw us a stone.
There was no chance of anybody being in that shop except us three.
Hang on. If we're going to do this as a proper test, well, I think we should be writing everything down.
With that, a pen dropped, and then I started saying things like engine parts.
What about a plug?
We knew then that it wasn't one of us. We were looking at each other, our hands were still on the bench.
We were there 2 hours, and I went home and told my wife I just spent the most fascinating couple of hours in my life. I couldn't believe it. We were never really afraid of it. It became part of the family.
We decided that we'd name him, and we called him Pete the Port, Pete the Poltergeist.
A poltergeist called Pete? Could there be such a thing? And why was it favouring Moa Services with its attentions? The family needed expert help. They called in David Fontana, a university professor with an interest in the paranormal.
Most of my visits were unannounced, so they didn't know that I was coming at any particular time.
With the element of surprise, the professor would surely get to the bottom of what was really happening.
As I entered the workshop, at that very moment, a stone was thrown across the room and bounced off a piece of machinery. And John was sitting there talking to one of the sales representatives, but there was no question that either of them was involved in this. And John looked up at me and said, "There, see what I mean? He's greeting you." I think I was very pleased, actually, because it's so rare for an investigator to be there when things actually happen. That made me take things very much more seriously than perhaps I otherwise would.
Professor Fontana was so convinced that he filed reports on what he called the responsive poltergeist. He said it possessed both intent and the rudimentary intelligence necessary to accomplish this intent. And he drew diagrams showing how, when objects were thrown into a corner he called the focus of activity, some force catapulted them back.
You don't see the things in midair. You hear them hit the wall and clatter to the ground, you look round and the stone is there, but you don't actually see it in flight. Which, in a sense, rather strengthens the idea that nobody's playing tricks, because if they were, you would see the thing in flight.
With Professor Fontana's reports, the case began to attract attention across Wales.
I wouldn't like people, you know, to get the wrong idea, and we were afraid if we started advertising about it, you know, we would frighten customers away.
But the customers kept coming, and so many people were eyewitnesses that this became one of the biggest poltergeist cases ever.
I was just as sceptical as everybody else. I'd heard all about this poltergeist, but I was in the shop one day and little nuts and boats sort of were just flying around, dropping from nowhere. It was quite incredible and quite scary.
After thieves broke into Moa Services one night, the insurance assessor who came witnessed it too.
When I was there, I heard the stones or noises coming from the back of the shop. When I asked them what it was about, I was told, "Oh, that's Pete the Poltergeist." I didn't really believe him. So I opened the door and looked through, and I could see a stone whizzing around on the floor. There was nobody else out there.
When Gareth Lucas went back to the office and told his story, the other insurance staff, not surprisingly, laughed, until a colleague went and the same happened to him.
Quite to my amazement, small stones and things were flying around and pinging off shelves, and I was able then to go back to the office and confirm his story.
Even the Baptist Church, one of two chapels either side of Moa Services, began to experience poltergeist phenomena.
Before I knew anyone else had problems, one evening I was working up here in the office and stones started hitting the window. I did everything I could to find out what it was. There were no people down there. I went down and looked around. There was nobody there that could throw stones. When I came back upstairs, the whole business continued.
But the minister believes he has an explanation.
As a Christian, I believe we live in a visible and seen world which has a supernatural dimension wrapped around it.
So what might that supernatural dimension be? Maurice Gross is a leading poltergeist expert. He's been investigating cases for 17 years.
There are two main theories of poltergeist phenomena. One is that some people have the ability to exteriorize a force which affects their physical surroundings without physical means. And the second theory is interference by outside entities. Now, we don't know what these entities are, but sometimes they appear to be spirits of dead people.
Nobody knew what the Moa Services poltergeist might be, until one day Fred says he saw it.
We were fixing this mower on the floor, and I looked up, and there was a tiny boy.
John, don't do anything too violent.
What are you talking about? I'll have to be violent to get this thing off.
No, I don't mean that. Now, do as I say. Don't turn around quickly, but look up gently at the shelf behind you, okay?
What are you talking about?
He was up there, on the shelf. A little boy. It must be Pete.
Half a house brick came hurtling down, and we both panicked with amazement. As you can imagine, he was all grey. No face, but the face was there. It's hard to explain. And all you could see was his hand waving.
From then on, the poltergeist never left Fred alone. Last year, Moa Services outgrew its old premises and moved to a new industrial estate. Pete the poltergeist didn't follow. He moved in with Fred instead.
And there's countless things that happened at home. Pictures turning in the frames, spoons being thrown up the stairs, pound coins. Oh, it's amazing.
Fred Cook and his wife have moved home to escape their unwanted guest. They took the precaution of breaking a piece of pottery which had kept appearing and disappearing. So far, there's been no sign of anything happening again. And those are our stories tonight. Strange, I'm sure you'll agree, but true. Until next week, good night.
Good evening. We have two stories for you tonight about ordinary people who've unwittingly stumbled upon the unknown. In one instance, they had to turn to an exorcist for help. I'll come to that later. But first, have you ever checked your watch and found you've lost a whole chunk of time? Or tried to find a place you remembered only to discover it doesn't exist? Well, tonight we have a story of three families who are convinced that for a few hours they travelled back in time. Paranormal investigators have a name for this. They call it time slip. Reports of time slip are rare, but it has a well-established pedigree. The first book on the subject was written over 80 years ago. It does sound unlikely, but as Sherlock Holmes once said, when you've eliminated all the alternatives, then whatever remains must be the truth, however improbable.
In 1993, Alf and Eileen Roberts were on holiday in Devon. It was 7:30 and they were heading back to their hotel when they got lost and found themselves in a village they didn't recognise.
We were on our way back to Dunster, found ourselves lost, and we stopped by the green at the top of the village to decide which way to go. And we noticed on the green was this huge wooden sign, varnished, highly polished, saying the best kept ward for the best kept village or something of Bampton, 1976.
I couldn't believe my eyes. It was so brilliant. The tubs of flowers and window boxes, everything was just one mass of the colour, blaze of colour. It was really lovely.
Alf and Eileen eventually found their way out of the village back to their hotel in Dunster. They hadn't planned to visit Bampton, but they were so impressed by the flower display that they decided to return the next day to take some photos.
Where's all the flowers gone?
I don't know. This doesn't really ring true. As we looked through the village, everything had gone.
As they headed back to the green, the centrepiece of the display, they were in for another shock.
The sign had gone, the flower bed had gone, it was just grass.
All the tubs and the flower pots and the hanging baskets, everything had gone. It seems as though we'd come back or been to a village, the same village, but another time.
Unsettled by their return visit, the couple remembered other strange things that had happened.
On arriving in the village the first time, dropped a cigarette on to the mapping that was laying on the floor in the car. Smoke was coming from it. Having checked that later on in the day, there was no marks whatsoever, as if it had never happened.
And during their journey, time appeared to stand still.
As we arrived in the village, we checked our watch and it was 7:30. As we left, we checked the time again and it was still 7:30, as if we hadn't been in the village.
It just seems as though it was the same village, but in a different time completely.
It sounds unlikely, and yet it turns out the best-kept village in 1976 was Bampton. Equally strange is the story of Cynthia and Len Gisby.
Hello, Jeff. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, mate. Pauline, hello.
They invited friends Pauline and Jeff Simpson to join them on a holiday in Spain. They set out to drive through France in the late summer of 1979. It was their first experience of life on the other side of the Channel, and it was to prove an unforgettable one.
We've been travelling from about 10 o'clock in the morning. It was getting 8 o'clock at night. And we started looking at from hotel, anything.
And we thought, well, that looks an ideal place. A very old world place it was.
Hey, what have we got here?
Oh, isn't this quaint? This'll do nicely.
I'll get the luggage. Ah, bonjour, monsieur, dame. Je peux vous aider?
Avez-vous deux chambres for three?
Ah, oui, on a deux chambres pour 4 personnes là-haut pour dormir.
Sleep.
Entrez, s'il vous plaît.
Oh,
It was not a very large dining room. There was about half a dozen or 7 tables with a little white cloth on.
Et voilà votre chambre, messieurs, dames. Soyez confortables.
The bed was very tall with a big brown furry cover on it. And when we pulled it back, it was a feather mattress with a sheet cover, and it was very hard calico type linen.
It's a bit chilly in here, love. Did you close the window?
See, you're not going to believe this. There's no glass in the window.
What?
There was just one opening in the wall. There were no glass in the windows at all. All you'd do was 2 shutters you pulled in from the outside.
That meal was formidable. You won't find food like that on a motorway service station.
No, that's true.
Oh, cutlery like this.
Yeah.
Maybe it was made locally.
And the beer?
I've never tasted anything like it before. Still, I couldn't let it go to waste, now could I?
We just thought it was old rural France and had a laugh at it all. We thought it was all part and parcel of the holiday, quite funny.
But we did enjoy the food though, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. It was
Really
lovely.
good.
And we were so hungry.
Sam! Come in, Pauline, love.
Slept well then?
Yeah. The boys want to take a photograph of us.
Oh, fame at last.
Smile, girls!
The gorgeous girls are here.
Bonjour, Albert.
While we were at breakfast, these 2 gendarmes came in. The thing that puzzled me more than anything was the uniforms of the gendarmes. I've never seen uniforms like that at all. I think they must have been regular customers coming in for their cognac and coffee in the mornings.
While we were having breakfast, a woman came in with a mauve dress on. She looked as though she'd been to a dance, very old-fashioned type.
They just said they'd been to an all-night party.
She looked very old-fashioned.
OK, Jeff, if you take the bags out, I'll pay the bill. The bill, how much? Payez, s'il vous plaît.
Un instant.
Pardon.
I asked the policeman if there was a road or another exit onto the autoroute.
Autoroute? Qu'est-ce que c'est l'autoroute?
Motorway? Autoroute? C'est Avignon.
Ah, mais oui, moi, maintenant je comprends.
He had no idea what an autoroute was, from my opinion anyway. Hadn't got a clue, so we thought that was rather funny.
Monsieur, l'addition s'il vous plaît.
Right.
Le dîner, le petit déjeuner, oui, et pour 4 personnes, non? Alors ça fait 2, 4, 9, 19. Le
Hey, Jeff, you'll never believe this. It was only 19 francs.
What, breakfast?
No, the whole lot.
Blaine came back and said, yeah, it's only 19 francs. I said, get off, come on, let's go. And we went.
They were so impressed by the hotel, they decided to stay there again on the way back to England.
Are you sure you're on the right road?
I'm sure it was down this road. We turned right at the bridge.
It was a right road, there's no doubt about it. Not in my mind, it was a right road. We went backwards and forwards 4 times and we couldn't find it.
I'm positive it was here.
Come on, let's go.
We gave up after about 4 manoeuvres up and down the road.
The next one cost us 247 francs for just a sandwich and a night.
The next surprise came back in England when the 2 couples had their photos developed.
I just don't understand it, Jeff. Those photos we took at the hotel, they haven't come out. Here, take a look. They were the last shots before we went to Spain, weren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Pauline. We've just got our holiday photos back. Oh, good. Could you check something for me? You definitely took those photos, didn't you?
Of course I did. I knew I'd taken a photograph and I'd seen Len take 2 photographs. I knew I should have had it on the roll of film that was developed. It wasn't there.
You'll never guess. The strangest thing has happened.
When Len's never come out, I was really surprised, shocked.
It was as though we hadn't taken them at all. Just weren't there, and there was no signs of them having been there.
The shock of the missing photographs spurred the Gisbys to carry out their own research. They discovered the gendarme's uniform and the dress worn by the woman dated from the 1900s. It's almost as if the two couples had travelled back in time. But why did no one comment on their car? And how did they pay the bill with modern money?
With the modern currency, he accepted it. And that was it. I mean, it's always puzzled me.
Strangely enough, bed, breakfast and evening meal for four would have cost just 19 francs at the turn of the century. And Len Gisby, for one, is willing to believe the impossible.
The only thing I could think of with all the dates corresponding is that we went into a time lapse. We went back in time.
Cynthia and Len and Pauline and Jeff did return to France a few years ago to search for the rustic hotel where they'd seen two policemen in their antiquated uniforms, and in the end they found the right road. But all the trees were much taller than they remembered, and tantalizingly, where the hotel had stood, they found the crumbling ruins of an old building. None of the locals could remember if it had ever been a hotel, but they did say the building next door had once been the village police station around the turn of the century. We may never know exactly how many exorcisms are carried out each year. The Church of England, which has about 250 ministers authorized to conduct the ritual, doesn't keep an accurate tally. The Roman Catholic Church does, but the records of their ministry of exorcisms remain strictly confidential. But we do know that every week, somewhere, an exorcist is being called out. This is the story behind one such call. It was a May afternoon in Bridlington when a cry for help came to the official exorcist to the Archbishop of York, the Reverend Tom Willis.
It seemed to be a restless soul who needed to receive the peace of God.
The circumstances were unusual. Tom Willis had been called out to exorcise a fishing trawler. A mysterious catalogue of disasters had affected the ship for several years. Skipper Mick Laws was a desperate man.
At first, I was very excited about becoming the skipper of the Pickering, but as time went by and things were going wrong and more wrong, it became the worst few months of my life.
As far as Mick Laws and his crew were concerned, the boat was jinxed.
Oh, no, not again! This is madness! Skipper, what's wrong? We're going round in circles. It's got a mind of its own. The autopilot's gone up the spout again.
I got called to the Pickering many times. Most of the faults were undefined. You couldn't really pin a fault down.
I don't believe this. There's no way that this can happen. It's impossible.
Chris Clark was used to dealing with the problems of the fishing fleet, but he'd never experienced difficulties like these before.
On one occasion, I went to the automatic pilot. When we asked the automatic pilot to go to starboard, the automatic pilot would go to port. I changed wires round to correct this, and everything was okay. Later on in the day, the polarity going to these two wires had reversed. Now, this is against the laws of physics.
I've never come across anything like this before. You've got the heating on, mate. It's freezing in here.
I was on the Pickering 6 months when the cabin was very, very cold and you could never get it warmed up. You could, no matter what heating we put in, it was always cold. In fact, it was a damn sight warmer down in the fish room with 8 ton of ice down there.
As Mick Laws recalls, even stranger things were happening on board the Pickering.
There was one night, I remember, when I was laid in my bunk. And the side of the mattress went down as though somebody stepped on it to climb in the bunk above. Shortly after, it did it again. When I looked out, there was nobody there. I went up into the mess room to ask any of the boys if they'd been down the cabin, and they all said no, and I thought they'd been messing me about and playing games. But as it turned out, nobody had been down there at all, just myself.
The most frightening incident Mick remembers happened one night when the crew were below deck, except for Barry Mason, who was left on watch.
the door flew open and Barry, with a shocked look on his face, said he'd seen somebody on the deck. But when we all went up to have a look, there was nobody to be seen.
The events at sea started to affect the whole crew and their livelihood.
Going to sea and broken trips all the time. Weren't even making expenses, always getting run off to sea and things going wrong and having to come back. And eventually, nobody can live without money.
What is it now?
Sorry, Skipper, it's done for. It keeps sticking.
Well, that's it, lads. We won't be going out today, not if the winch is not working. Come on, it's all back down the job centre. Come on,
It was on yet another visit to the local job centre that the crew found an answer to their problem.
Hello, Mick, here again.
All right, afraid so. It's the winch that's gone now. If it's not one thing, it's another.
I'm sorry to hear that.
You know, if things get much worse, I might have to get an exorcist in.
Well, if you're serious, I know someone who could help.
Oh, why? Who's that then?
The Reverend Tom Willis. He does exorcisms. I could contact him if you want.
I had a talk to him and quickly established that there was something very strange going on the boat, and Mike was being very serious. And so I offered to pass him on to the Reverend Tom Willis, who I knew through my connections with the church.
I'm one of the 9 advisors to the Archbishop on occult disturbances. We're all parish priests, and we are called out quite frequently to places and people which seem to have very odd things happening to them. We talked to the skipper and the crew and to a previous skipper, and they all seemed to point to the fact that these phenomena were real.
His investigations uncovered a tragic history to the boat.
It pointed to the death of a previous crewman when it belonged to a family in Ireland, and it seemed to be connected with his death.
The Reverend Willis discovered the Pickering had been built in Ireland and originally named the Family Crest. On the 1st of December 1977, in rough seas, a crewman fell overboard and drowned. The owner was devastated and sold the boat. He never fished again. The new owners renamed it the Pickering.
Having investigated the history of the boat, we felt that there was a need to exorcise the boat and to pray for the repose of his soul.
Reverend Willis was called to the quayside.
Hi, Vicar. Like a lift. I hear you going down to the Pickering. I'm on my way there again. Come on, get in. Will you?
He met up with the radar engineer on yet another call to the trawler.
You might be able to do something about that boat. We'll have to see. Don't believe in all that myself. I must admit, there's a very odd atmosphere on that boat. It's really weird. Is this the Pickering? Hi, Vicar. Come aboard.
I hope I'm going to be able to help.
Oh, well, thanks for coming, Reverend.
I think we should take her out of harbour to sea. I don't want to attract too much attention.
Okay. Okay, Roger. Cast her off.
The priest began the exorcism with the reported cold spots.
There's definitely one in here.
Well, we'll make a start with this one then. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, I command all evil to depart from this vessel.
And while the vicar was doing the exorcism itself, we were desperately hoping that this was going to create a positive change. It was costing time, effort, and money.
This is where I felt something step in and climb into this bunk here.
Fine. Okay. Peace be unto this ship and all who sail in her.
Dear Lord, Lord and Father, please bless this ship. I think I've run out of holy water. I'd like to finish with a short prayer. O Lord Jesus Christ, King of kings, Lord of lords, please preserve us from all evil, and we pray for the soul of thy dear departed. Amen.
The next day, Tom Willis called the captain of the Pickering.
Hello, Reverend. I can't tell you what difference you've made. But the whole atmosphere seems warmer, it's brilliant. Well, I'll tell you something. You've saved my boat.
I'm pleased to say that everything's okay. No problems whatsoever since that point.
The mysterious happenings aboard the Pickering disappeared overnight, and she's now a successful member of her fishing fleet.
I would regard it as another example of the love of God coming into a disturbed situation and bringing peace to a restless soul.
The Pickering was the first boat the Reverend Tom Willis had ever been called out to. But he says he's now performing more exorcisms than ever before, 40 in the past year alone. Good night.
Now strange but true. Next, ancient graves. And later, life after death.
Good evening. Tonight we examine the links, seen and unseen, between twins. Chang and Eng were the original Siamese twins. They were born in 1811, and although they were never actually separated, they led active lives. They married two American sisters and ran two family homes, spending a few days in each. One had 10 children, the other 12. Chang took to drink and Eng had to share the hangovers. They were joined together by a fibrous band at the chest. Nowadays, they could easily have been separated. But is there another link between identical twins? A telepathic link that can never be broken?
Welcome to Twinsburg, 1995.
Happy Twins Day.
Once a year, over 4,000 sets of twins descend on the town of Twinsburg, Ohio. It's the Twins Day Festival, and they all arrive 2 by 2.
I'm a little more outgoing than Bob. See, I'm more quiet. I'll dress up more than him and things like that.
To the observer, identical twins hold a particular fascination. The exact physical likeness. The same hobbies. The same tastes. In fact, there's one restaurant owned by twins that will only employ twins as waiters.
But they have to work at the same time in the same shift. They have to work together. But they'll screw up and blame it on the other one. Or they'll switch their name tags when they wear name tags. I'm Juanita, not Shanita. I'm Charlene, not Darlene. So and our motto in the restaurant is you can only make a first impression once, we make it twice.
But do twins share more than just physical characteristics? Some twins believe they have a closeness that even conventional science can't explain.
We call it twinship, or twin insight. We've experienced it several times. We've been tested to have a high degree of ESP among each one of us. One of the most outstanding one that we've had was when I was in a car accident, and I was able to direct help to her without knowing where she was. I was visualizing it in my mind as it was happening.
There will be times that I'll answer the telephone and say, Jeff, what do you want? And I'm not sure it's him, but I can tell by the ring or something that it's Jeff. I mean, it's amazing.
My first baby, she was down the shore, vacationing, and she wasn't due yet. I wasn't due for the baby. She gets up in the morning at 7:30, which she doesn't do on vacation at all. Never. And I couldn't walk. I could not get out of bed. I got out of bed and fell on the floor. Well, I was with my older sister, and she's like, what's with you? And I go, must have been a bad mattress. Now I'm walking like this. Now we call. I go, something's wrong. So we call her husband, and he goes, Jill had the baby. I'm like, she didn't have the baby. She's not due yet. And he goes, yes, she did. And she never told me this story. She felt my labor pains. Yeah. Never told me this story. Now, the second time I got pregnant, I said, I'm pregnant. And she looked at me and she goes, not again.
For identical twins, this is the moment of creation. The egg splits and two separate fetuses begin to form. Two individuals, but with identical sets of genes. Science maintains that at the moment of separation, all links with the other half are broken. But does an invisible connection remain? Dr. Susan Blackmore, who has studied twin behavior, remains unconvinced by tales of twin telepathy.
If they're identical twins, they are genetically the same. So their brains are much more similar than most pairs of people's brains would be. And so they think in similar ways. Then there are all the things where twins are brought up together in their own background. And all these things can lead to what appear like the most extraordinary coincidences, but actually they spring from their lives together.
But what if twins had never lived together? What if they were separated at birth? It's from this group that some of the most incredible stories have emerged. On the 19th of August 1939, a woman gave birth to identical twin boys in Bradford, Ohio. Due to family pressure, she was unable to keep them, and she agreed to put them both up for adoption. Four weeks later, Ernest Springer, a maintenance engineer, and his wife Sarah adopted one of the boys. 2 weeks after that, Jess Lewis, a boilerman, and his wife Lucille took the other child away. There was nothing unusual about the adoptions, except for one small coincidence. Both families decided to call their sons James. The twins, it seemed, had been separated for good, identical in every way, but destined to be strangers for the rest of their lives. Over half a century later, James Lewis is now living in Lima, Ohio. He was 6 before he learned he had a twin brother. It would take over 33 years of searching to track him down.
I took the adoption papers to court where the adoption took place, and I told the judge what I wanted to do. And he said, well, I'll see what I can do for you.
Jim Lewis's twin brother, Jim Springer, was also living in Ohio when he received a letter from the adoption agency. It gave him quite a shock. For 39 years, he'd believed that his twin had died at birth.
Well, I was very surprised and everything. I didn't know what to make of it. I didn't know, whether it's true or it was a hoax. Or I always kind of had a feeling that, he wasn't dead, but yet, all the proof was said that he was, so.
Jim Springer decided to phone Jim Lewis. It was the first time the brothers had spoken.
Strange, very strange. We didn't know what to say. It was short. He introduced himself to me, and he told me what he wanted to see me about and everything. But I do remember one thing funny. He asked me what kind of beer I drank. And of course we both felt like Miller's Light. And pretty soon, I just blurted out and asked Jim if he was my brother.
What did he say?
Yes.
It seemed a cruel twist of fate, but the twins discovered they'd spent most of their lives living only 40 miles apart. After the initial phone call, they arranged their first meeting. It was February 1979.
It was like standing there looking at myself. I felt very close to him from the beginning. He wasn't a stranger. Wasn't a stranger at all from the very moment I saw him. It wasn't like meeting somebody, you know, for the first time. Did like I knew him.
The story might have ended there. Two brothers, separated at birth, happily reunited in middle age. But as the two men began to discuss their lives apart, an extraordinary series of events were revealed.
Good. Got it.
For nearly 40 years, it seemed, the two men had been living parallel lives. The coincidences began in childhood, at school, for example.
I never liked spelling, and I liked math. We liked math. We didn't like spelling.
Back home, both boys came up with unusual names for their dogs.
Toy, T-O-Y. I call it Toy. Now, why I ever named it that, I don't know. That's the name I gave the dog.
The twins left school, and there were more coincidences. They discovered they both enrolled as police officers.
Jim worked for Miami County, I think, police department. I worked for Shawnee Township Police Department. We were both doing the same job at the same time.
The two Jims went on to marry and become fathers. Again, their lives seemed to be running in parallel.
My first wife was named Linda, and my second wife was named Betty. Okay, the first one was Linda, and then my second wife was Betty. Betty and I have a son. We named him James Allen. When I was married to Betty, we had our first son was named James Allen.
In their spare time, the two men continued to mirror each other's behavior. Both men liked to unwind after work by smoking the same brand of cigarettes and drinking the same make of beer. They both enjoyed woodwork and built basement workshops in their houses. Outside, they had white benches built around the trunk of a tree in their gardens, where Jim Lewis's remains to this day. One of the more astonishing coincidences occurred over holiday plans. There's nothing unusual in going to Florida every year, but Florida has thousands of miles of beaches, and every year Jim Lewis and Jim Springer would go to exactly the same stretch of beach.
Several times I've been to St. Petersburg Beach, at a particular spot of about 1 mile long, and it's got water around it. I've got a canal on one side and of course the Gulf on the other. It was very amazing that we never ran across one another because we had vacationed there a couple times about the same time.
Wives with the same names, same jobs, same hobbies, even the same holiday destination. But one of the biggest surprises came after they met. They were invited to the Minnesota Center for Twins Research, where they took a battery of tests. The results were so similar, the researchers made them take the tests again.
Some of the tests that Jim and I took on the multiple choice, they had to do over again because Jim and I answered almost the same identical questions, the same answer.
The lives of the Jim twins seem so incredible because until very late in life, they'd never even met. Were the similarities coincidences or some form of telepathic communication? Their identical genetic makeup would account for some of these similarities, but the names of their wives, sons, and even dogs? Skeptics argue that it's easy to be deceived.
We start looking for certain types of coincidence. What you don't do is ask, well, what sort of car have they got? What sort of animals have they got? What sort of music do they like? You don't ask those other questions, which will come not to be coincidences. You just conveniently forget about those. So the process of selection produces an awful lot of amazing-looking coincidences that really aren't.
The Jim twins admit their lives aren't perfect mirrors. Jim Lewis divorced Betty and is now married to Sandy, while Jim Springer is still married to his Betty.
There is a joke about that. My wife's very afraid I'll meet a woman named Sandy one of these days.
But can the twins' story really be put down to a quirk of fate, a series of bizarre coincidences? The chance happenings in the twins' lives seem so unbelievable and so numerous that it's hard not to consider another possibility, that the two men were never completely separated back in 1939 and somehow maintained a telepathic link for the rest of their lives. Researchers have now studied the lives of hundreds of identical twins who were separated at birth, but none of them can match the astonishing series of coincidences shown by the Jim twins. According to a recent survey, nearly half the people in this country believe in ghosts, and 1 in 7 actually claims to have seen one. If you're among that number, then you may not find tonight's eyewitness accounts all that surprising. But reports of independent witnesses all seeing the same ghost over a short period of time are rare. And a further mystery remains. Why was this ghost more upset than the people who spotted her? Flitwick Manor has stood in the heart of the Bedfordshire countryside for 300 years. For over half its life, it was the ancestral home of the Brooks family. But at the end of last year, builders moved in to renovate the manor. It's now a hotel. They stumbled upon a secret room in the roof, which had lain undisturbed for decades.
We came up to start work on the roof and start to remove the tiles and then remove the brickwork. We found a small doorway. Then we found the evidence of a frame in the end of the roof, which indicated that sometime there was some sort of attic room here.
After that, things started to happen at Flitwick Manor. Just 3 days later, the hotel received an odd complaint from a departing guest.
As a hotel receptionist, I have had some odd complaints, but I have to say that I've never had a complaint like this before.
Everything all right for you, sir?
No, not really.
Why? What happened?
I think I had a visitor during the night. Something or someone. I don't know what happened. I just know I never want to stay in that room again.
I'm sorry you had an uncomfortable night. Can I get someone to help you with those
No,
bags?
that's all right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
He seemed slightly nervous then. I didn't really know quite what to say and basically didn't really take a lot of notice of it.
But from then on, various members of staff began to notice that something had changed at Flitwick Manor. Sonia Banks, the hotel manager, was staying on the second floor one night.
I had just locked up the hotel and I was retiring to room 8. Then I heard footsteps walking across the ceiling and a door slam towards the front of the house where the little room had been discovered. I must say I was a bit taken aback and surprised at this because I was the only person in the hotel that night.
Sonia is not the only person to have experienced a presence of some kind. Chef Duncan Poyser also had to sleep at the hotel one night. His bedroom was also on the second floor.
I retired to bed at about 1 o'clock. Just lay on my back, gently drifting. When I tried to turn, I couldn't move the bottoms of my legs.
It was as if someone or something was sitting on them, but there was no one there.
Tried again a second time. The third time it was as if the weight lifted up. I was a little bit shocked and startled. It was just a really strange experience, really strange feeling.
So what could possibly be happening at Flitwick Manor? The first paranormal activity came within days of the opening up of the hidden attic room. Had the builders released something, some spirit, which was now returning to its old haunting ground?
Come on.
One clue may lie with this man. John Lyle is the last direct descendant of the Brooks family to have lived at Flitwick. He's now retired to his farm in Wiltshire, but 50 years ago, John spent his childhood at the manor.
My mother used to tell us when we were children that when she lay in bed at night, she would hear a ghost knocking on the bedroom door. And there was also quite a few stories in the village about the fact that Flitwick Manor was haunted.
Those stories have been forgotten in recent times, until the hurried departure of that hotel guest. John Hines will never forget his stay at Flitwick Manor.
I detected that there was something in the room with me. I got a feeling that there was a presence there. I can't describe it.
John Hines had checked into his room at Flitwick following a business conference. He went to bed around 1 a.m.
Five minutes later, something very heavy landed on the foot of the bed. Fumbled around to try and find the light switch. And there was nothing there. Nothing there at all. Oh, this is crazy, John, you know, go back to sleep. I've tried to settle down again. A few minutes later, there's a shuffling at the bottom of the bed. There was a silhouette of a person actually sitting at the foot of the bed. I froze. I was petrified.
Who are you? What do you want?
No response from her. She just sat there gazing out towards the window.
John spent the rest of the night awake, a grown man too scared to turn the lights off.
I consider myself to be a very skeptical person, and I really can't believe that it was a ghost that I saw. But I've no other explanation for it.
Is there anything in the history of Flitwick Manor which might explain the apparition? Richard Morgan is another descendant of the Brooks family who lived there throughout the 19th century. He has made a detailed study of his family's history.
The first of the family to live here, John Thomas Brooks, kept a diary, and that describes the life here. It's quite clear that the most important event, as far as their diarist was concerned, was the death of a much-loved only daughter, Mary Ann Brooks, who was only 26.
This is the entry for the 20th of September, 1848.
I sat by her dying bed, watching her with the most intense earnestness and misery. And at 7 o'clock, her breathing having gradually become weaker and weaker, she gently drew her last breath on earth.
They were all very shocked when the daughter died. It was clearly a terrible shock to them all. And I think the mother in particular one must pick out as being a tragic figure. She outlived her husband by 20 years. She died aged 86 of senile decay, and I think one has to say that she is rather a sad figure.
Could this woman's personal tragedy be linked to John Hines' ghostly sighting, or the events which happened the very next night? Hotel receptionist Lydia Dawson had a night she'll never forget.
Was just beating so fast, and I was just begging that she'd go away. My heart was thumping the whole time. I'd just never seen anything like it. I came back into the room. I found that all the lights were on, and I know I hadn't actually put them on myself. I think the reason that I was actually so upset was I sensed that she was crying, so she was upset, which was then causing me to feel upset.
And at Flitwick Manor, the unexplained happenings continue even today.
Whoever she is, she's totally harmless, and we've just got used to having her around.
Perhaps, but the staff don't like to stay over anymore.
Things have now quietened down at the manor, but it just goes to show you ought to think twice before getting the builders in. I'll be back next week with a special edition of Strange But True. Until then, good night.
Next on the Paranormal Channel, Strange But True.
Of all the people who claim to have witnessed unexplained phenomena, very few can offer what can be regarded as proof. Their stories can be easily dismissed, and often are, but do they deserve more? All we can do is look them in the eye and decide for ourselves whether they're genuine, and ask ourselves why anyone should make up such a story, especially when they risk ridicule. The key witnesses in our first story tonight are people you'd normally trust. Some indeed have frequently given evidence in courts of law. Here's the story, believe what you will. Ever since building work began, a new section of road across the top of the Peak District has attracted reports of strange happenings. The first was from two security guards, and this is what they saw one night.
Roses. A group of children running in a circle in a field at the side of a construction site. The time was round about midnight, and you just wouldn't see children playing there at that time of night when it was so far away from any houses. And the children disappeared. They were security men who'd been in the industry a long time. They knew the job. They had worked nights for a number of years, and not the type of people that you'd expect to be scared.
The A616 used to pass straight through this old steel town, but then the road planners got to work on Stocksbridge. They built a sweeping new bypass. While it may have made the town quieter, some believe the bypass disturbed something which would have been best left alone. Certainly the two security guards who were watching over the equipment being used to build it would agree. They were still puzzling over the sight of the children, but that was just the beginning.
The next incident was later on that night.
Here, Stan, stop the car. Look, there's someone up there. Don't be daft. There can't be. Yes, there is. Look! You drive around, shine your lights on bridge. I'll wait down here. Right.
They immediately started the vehicle up, shone the headlights towards the hooded figure, and the headlights actually shone through the figure.
Oh, God! It's disappeared into thin air! Let's get out of here!
The men, in a state of shock, called their boss out. He was alarmed at the state they were in.
Dan, Jeff. They were physically shaking. Their complexion was very white and pallid. One of the guards was actually crying.
Go on, try me. Well, it's difficult to describe it. Yeah. It looked like a monk. I mean, what were we doing there? I don't know, it were evil. Yeah. How can it just disappear?
First thing the next morning, the men went to the local police. The officer on duty knew them.
It was obvious that they'd seen or heard something. They were both spooked. And basically,
I said to them it was not really a police matter and there was nothing I could do about it. And perhaps jokingly I told them that really they needed the church more than they needed the police.
But they took him seriously. They went to Stocksbridge Church and refused to leave.
About an hour or so later I received a phone call from my boss and I was told to go up to the church and sort this matter out, firstly to get them out of the church and then see if I could find out anything that they'd actually seen, heard or whatever.
The security guards never, it seems, got over what happened to them.
One of them left after 3 days and the other one stayed with us roughly 2 to 3 months, and neither of the two guards would set foot on that site again, even in the daylight.
While the bypass was being built, runner Graham Brooke was training for a marathon. One day he was out jogging with his son Nigel.
I saw a chap walking with his back to the traffic. He was walking in the middle of the road.
I looked at it and you could see it had no features to it except for a nose and eye sockets.
I could smell like this fusty, rotteny smell.
Not a human type smell.
And then I could see that he wasn't walking on the road, he was like walking in the road, and from below the knee down, you know, you couldn't see anything.
Each time things are apparently seen, the descriptions vary, but the reputation of the bypass deepens.
We were coming home from Judy's parents over the bridge that goes over the bypass.
Dave, look. I could see out of the corner of my eye like a grey apparition. There was actually no facial expressions.
It was hovering. Arms and legs were flaying all over the place.
Strange. It looks almost like a man running. But he's not running on the ground.
It would run up the embankment.
He actually rose from the side into the road and he disappeared into the car. Oh my God!
I can think of no other explanation for what we saw. In my mind, I think in both of our minds, what we saw had to have been a ghost.
So if something does keep appearing on the bypass, what is it? Lucinda June is a psychic. She says she knows.
I was driving along the Stocksbridge bypass and the car started to become very, very cold. With this came a smell of musty books. Then all of a sudden a darkness appeared to the left-hand side of me and I felt very, very frightened. And I did pick up the spirit of a monk that had been there 500 years previous.
But why should a long-dead monk be on what is now the Stocksbridge bypass? It's been discovered there were once monastery farms in the area.
The rumour or the story is that one of these monks became disillusioned with the rather harsh autocratic way of life. He came here to Underbank Hall, worked the rest of his natural life here as groundsman or whatever, and subsequently when he died he was buried in unhallowed ground.
Some believe the bypass may have been built over the supposed monk's grave, and they also have theories to explain the children seen by the security guards.
Children were used in the valley's coal mines in the late 18th and mid-19th century. The rumour suggests that there's been some sort of a mining catastrophe.
So, a phantom monk, ghostly children. After dealing with the security men in the church, P.C. Ellis and his colleague John Beat were sent to investigate.
Let's switch the radios off. Right.
We sat in the Panda car with the lights off and the engine off.
Seems all right.
We sat looking at the bridge, and after a while I was convinced I could see something moving about on the bridge. Not wanting to spook myself or John, I kind of looked at John.
Hang on. What's sat up there? Go and see what it is, Dick.
I actually climbed up the ladder onto the bridge, and there was a lot of things scattered about on the top of the bridge.
It's only a sheet of polythene!
Well, once we thought we'd found out what it was and what was actually on the bridge, we decided to give it another 10-15 minutes and say we'll forget it and we'll go back on our normal patrol.
suddenly got this feeling, you can't explain it. There's this saying, somebody's walked over your grave, which turns you cold. And I then became aware that somebody now had appeared directly on my right hand side and was virtually leaning and pressing themselves against the car. I managed to cast my head quickly to the right and remember seeing the upper section of somebody's chest torso and a clear V sign.
Oh my God! Look! What the heck is it? I don't know. It's gone. Is it?
When I got out of my side, not a person, nothing about at all. I even hit the deck and looked under the vehicle because nobody could have run away from us with bankings on both sides. Nobody ran forwards or backwards. We went to start the car, and at first the car wouldn't start. We started to panic a little bit. We drove off and radioed our colleagues. There was a bang behind the car, which I can only really put down to sounding like somebody was hitting the back of the car with something like a baseball bat with a pickaxe handle.
We need help on the bypass side.
Things on this job have frightened me, and it wasn't the kind of fear that you get from violence offered towards you or anything like that. It was more the kind of dread feeling or knowing that something's happening that you've no control over.
Just for the record, the Stocksbridge bypass was opened on Friday the 13th. The Bible probably contains more supernatural phenomena than any book ever written. Amongst them are nearly 300 appearances by angels, including those which foretold Christ's nativity, and an angel which led Moses to the parting of the Red Sea. Heavenly beings also feature heavily on stained glass windows and Christmas cards. It's a comforting thought that we might all have a guardian angel, but is it just what some want to believe? Now, these books are all testimonies of angelic intervention, and they've sold 5 million copies in America. It's there that our next story is set, with a young woman in a desperate plight.
It was the most treacherous cliff that I've ever seen. So I started screaming, "Help, help, somebody help me." Don't know how I got down. No one else could possibly have survived it without angelic assistance.
Rescued by angels. Chantal Lakey is one of hundreds who claim that when life is on the brink of crisis, heavenly beings have stepped in. An incredible claim. But such tales of survival are so remarkable, so incredible, that it seems normal explanations hardly apply. Shari Peterson has to fly all over the world in her job as a travel guide. Planes are her second home. But on a flight from Hawaii to New Zealand, she realized something unusual was happening.
The flight attendant, as she was walking up the aisle, she was serving people walking towards me. We made eye contact, and we looked at each other, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. We just connected in some way. That kind of eye contact and connection with people, you just don't do that when you fly.
Another passenger was Bruce Lamford, a former pilot who's now a lawyer, specializing in injury claims after plane crashes.
The irony of the fact that I was, instead of being the lawyer, I was going to be the victim, did not escape me as I sat on that airplane that night.
I usually loosen or undo my seatbelt, and that's when I heard the voice.
Only Shari Peterson had heard the voice, seemingly from nowhere.
I thought, that's not something one person would say to another person. And that's when I went, I'm going to do this.
Less than a minute later, she knew why.
Suddenly there was this huge boom, and then this incredible decompression as the side of the airplane opened up.
This accident literally was every air traveler's worst nightmare. The aircraft was fully loaded, and as it was climbing through 22,000 feet, the forward cargo door opened in flight. It was caught in the 300-knot airstream, tearing a hole through the main cabin. Anybody that would not have been fastened in their seat would have been ejected through the hole.
I could see the ocean out the hole that was below me, and I'm thinking, you know, if there's anybody out there who can hear me, meaning whoever told me to tighten my seatbelt, please help.
Although 9 passengers were killed, the plane landed safely.
They have done numerous simulations of the actual accident, and they can't make the plane land. We had 2 engines on fire, the side of the airplane's gone, we were, you know, loaded with fuel. Since that time I've gotten to know the pilot and Captain Cronin, and he said he did not land that airplane. I quote. That was really not from this world. A messenger from somewhere, call it what you will. I believe it was an angel.
And as he began to handle the compensation claims, Bruce Lampert found she was not the only one.
The husband and wife related to me that he heard a voice. Of the 50 people that I represented, they all had dramatic stories. But I found it very unusual that out of those folks, the 2 of them had actually heard somebody on the aircraft during the trauma of the crisis speaking to them.
But is all this just wishful thinking, a comforting way to face such traumatic experiences for the victims?
They believe that they've seen angels because, to a certain extent, they have. They have seen them. They seemed real to them. Now, I don't think they saw something that was outside themselves. I think that they saw them in their own minds. On occasion, things can conspire and produce a waking dream that has all the attributes of reality.
Real or not, so many people now claim to have had angel experiences that one believer, Marilyn Weber, holds weekly discussion groups at her home.
And just last week in Chicago, one of the
it does
on the playground,
never cease to amaze us of many stories that people tell us about angels.
One of the stories that has really touched me lately has to do with the earthquake that took place a few months ago.
My grandson's teacher was sound asleep on the couch. Something tapped her on the shoulder and said, "Get up." And she said she immediately woke up and walked down into the basement. Her whole home was destroyed. And where she was laying, a beam from the ceiling had fell right on the couch.
You know, whatever.
Marilyn Weber has received almost 10,000 letters from angel believers, and she's even started up a mail order business. She became a devotee herself after, she insists, 4 angels came to her in a dream.
Yes, that's a ceramic one that's made by a special... And they weren't the angels I wanted to see or expected to see, because they were dressed in black. And their message to me was that I was dying. Unless something was done, I was dying. So I woke up as so distressed with this dream and with a pain that I'd never felt before.
Marilyn rushed to hospital. Her medical records showed that she was found to have a form of cancer from which patients never usually feel any pain until it's too late.
I wouldn't have gone to a doctor had I not had the warning, and had the cancer just been allowed to continue, then I would not have survived.
Some people don't claim only to have heard strange voices or dreamed about angels, though. They say they've actually seen them.
Yes, sure you will.
Joe was very, very athletic, very much into trying new events and exciting, adventurous things.
Chantal Lakey and her fiancé Dale Thompson were on their way home from a holiday on the west coast of America when they stopped the car to climb a rock overlooking the sea for a spectacular view of the ocean.
I wanted that moment at the top of the mountain to last forever. because I had never felt more intimate and close to Dale.
God, this is gorgeous.
I don't want to leave.
Oh, I know, I don't want to go home.
Well, you know what?
What?
We do have a few hours. Why don't we just take this trail over here and go down to the beach? Let's go, okay?
Okay. All right.
His hand was outstretched to me, and he said, "How's your fear factor?" And I said, "Oh, I'm fine. Don't worry about me." But in actuality, I was terrorized. I was scared to death. All of a sudden, after several feet, the trail turned into a straight drop. And we found ourselves upon a cliff, and we didn't know what to do. We started to try to climb back up, but we couldn't do it because every time we moved our hands or our feet, the rock would fall. He looked at me and he said, "What we need to do is inch our way down, and I'm going to go first." He kept falling and falling until I couldn't see him fall anymore. And I was up there all alone. I couldn't move. I couldn't see any place to put my hands or my feet, and I was so afraid. I was frozen, just frozen in time, frozen in space. All of a sudden, I was in a mist. I just remember hearing the singing and feeling the mist all around me and the love and the specialness. And at that instant, I knew there was angels.
Chantal found herself at the foot of the cliffs. Dale had been killed, but she wasn't even injured. So was she helped by unearthly hands? Could she have made it another way? Not according to the local police.
The professional rescue team in reality didn't come down the same route that Dale fell. It was far too dangerous even with the gear and the professional training. Chantal said she came partway down that face of that rock. It's the opinion of the rescue personnel that once committed, neither could a person come down unassisted nor go back up. So how she got off that rock is left to speculation.
I know that it was real. I know that the angels were there for me.
After Dale's death, Chantal Lakey met a new man. He'd had an angel experience too, and now he's becoming famous for painting pictures of them. And these guardian spirits are appearing not just in America, but all over the place. A few years ago, Russian cosmonauts in an orbiting space station radioed back to base saying that they had seen angelic beings outside their spacecraft. Well, they were very high. Until next time, good night.
Next on the Paranormal Channel, Strange But True.
Every year, hundreds of unidentified flying objects, UFOs, are reported over the British Isles. Most of them can be explained, but about 1 in 10 defy the investigators. Witnesses make astonishing claims of their close encounters, of bizarre lights darting around the sky, communication with other forms of intelligence, even of being abducted by aliens. But none is more remarkable than the story we're going to tell tonight. It resulted in inquiries on both sides of the Atlantic and questions in Parliament. It involved senior American Air Force personnel and a former chief of staff at the Ministry of Defense. The witnesses and the evidence they gathered are impossible to ignore. This is the first time all those directly involved have told their story, and we've reconstructed what they described. American airmen stationed in Britain tell of events that would change their lives.
I came to Britain from a tour in the Pentagon, having previously served in the Far East and, of course, in Vietnam like many other people, and I kind of expected it to be somewhat of a quiet tour.
I was at the height of the Cold War, but we weren't directly involved like the bases in Europe.
It was very laid back, not much happened, and you never expected much to happen, especially at Christmas time.
Bentwaters and Woodbridge, twin military air bases in East Anglia. The 3 miles that divide them are filled by Rendlesham Forest. Until last year, the bases were occupied by the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing of the United States Air Force. Although a normally uneventful assignment, they formed a strategic part of Western Europe's defences. As such, they had top security status. Nothing could get in or out without being detected. An RAF radar station nearby. During the monitoring of a night flying exercise, a strange object was picked up.
We didn't have the faintest idea what it was. We checked through the air traffic agencies. There should have been nothing in that area at the time.
Yeah, Colin, have a look at this. It's just completely static. It's just hovering there.
The only thing we could do was send a jet aircraft in to find out what it was.
Bravo 60, Bravo 60, we have unidentified traffic in your area. Your new target is 270 degrees, range 10 miles, indicating 5,000 feet, over.
They got to within about a quarter of a mile, and the pilots suddenly started reporting that they could see a very bright light in the sky in front of them.
Extremely bright lights. It's moving away, target accelerating away.
Look at that thing go. Bravo 60, target is still in front of you. It's going straight up. Target going straight up, over.
It was stationary on the screen, and then, in seconds, it moved off at a fantastic rate of speed. Within a space of 5 minutes, it was reaching 90,000 feet and higher, and we lost it off the top end of the radar scope.
Target's accelerating too fast. We can't keep up with it. We're disengaging.
The radar operators were mystified.
There's nothing we have in this day that can perform those kind of manoeuvres. The pilots wouldn't be able to take it. You tell me what it was.
Back on Woodbridge Base, near the East Gate, Airman John Burrows was on security patrol with a colleague.
Stop the car. Look at that. Do you see that in the woods?
There were strange lights out in the forest. To me, it almost looked like Christmas lights at first, a Christmas display.
I'll open the gate.
At that point, we looked at each other and we decided that we better go out and take a closer look because we weren't sure what we were dealing with. What we were looking at wasn't real.
Those are no Christmas lights. Come on, let's get out of here.
Airman Burrows and his colleague raced back to the gatehouse, where he contacted the security controller.
Hi, this is Burrows here. I'm out at the East Gate. We've got a problem here.
He had a lot of trouble believing what I was telling him because it was Christmas and I played a lot of jokes on him before.
I'm serious. This is not a joke. There's something out there.
Eventually persuaded by the airman's tone, the controller contacted Sergeant Jim Peniston.
Roger, Control. We're on our way over.
I received a call from the control center to go on down to the East Gate and contact John Burrows. And I asked him what was the nature of the problem down there. And they said that they'd rather not tell me. They'd rather have me go down there and talk to the patrolman on scene.
What is that?
I don't know, and I don't want to know.
Did you hear an explosion, John?
It didn't crash. It landed.
The first thing that came to mind is an aircraft crash. I've had at least 30 or 40 crashes that I have been to at that point in time, and that's definitely what I thought it was.
I'm going to contact Control. Sergeant Peniston at the East Gate. I've got a possible aircraft down just beyond the perimeter.
They notified me that they were tracking an unidentified bogey about 15 minutes ago, and they confirmed it with contact with Eastern Radar and Heathrow in London. And at the approximate location, about 5 miles off base, when they lost contact with it.
Well, they registered it. They don't know what it is either.
So, a plane or what?
It was Christmas time, and there was no scheduled flying for that night.
I'd heard rumors that it possibly could have been a British exercise with ships and planes out at sea.
Whatever it was, Sergeant Peniston knew they had to go and find out.
I got permission to proceed off base to investigate.
Following military rules, the Americans had to leave their weapons behind.
One part of me wanted to go ahead and go out there and figure out what we were dealing with, and the other part of me was saying, no, you don't need to go out there, just go ahead, stay back at the gate where it's safe and you don't have to worry about what's going on.
The men went through the forest towards the lights.
This is as far as we go. It's out on foot now.
I started to see a defined shape, and at that point is when I realized it wasn't an aircraft crash, a fire, or anything of that sort. The air was filled with electricity that you could feel it on your skin as we approached the object.
You felt like you were moving in slow motion. Your hair on the back of your head was standing up. You felt like you had very little control over your body.
Then they saw it.
I wish I had my weapon because I felt totally defenseless.
It was about the size of a tank. It was triangular in shape. Underneath the craft was a high-intensity white light emanating out of it, and it was bordered by red and blue lighting, alternating.
When nothing happened, the men, deciding the object wasn't hostile, got up to take a closer look.
On the upper left side of the craft was an inscription that measured 6 inches high of symbols. They looked familiar, but I couldn't ascertain why.
The Americans watched for about 20 minutes.
And slowly started moving back, weaving in and around the trees. Got about 40 feet away, then it raised up into the air, and it shot off as fast as you can blink.
On their return to the airbase, the men were called in by the officer in charge.
Well, what happened out there last night? We know radar saw something. Now I want you to tell me in your words exactly what you saw.
Well, sir, Burroughs was the first to see.
As we were standing there reporting in, then it hit me, and I realized, what in the world am I doing here, standing in front of my lieutenant, getting ready to explain this situation that I just observed. I thought, there goes the career, Jim.
Had markings on it.
Okay, this is what I want you to do.
Gentlemen, he says, I need you to go over to the woods, he says, and take a look at the area in daylight to see if you can find any more physical evidence.
Anything.
We found branches on the ground. We found indentations in the ground.
The local Suffolk police went out too. An officer found the indentations but reported they'd been caused by animals burrowing.
I asked him why, and he says because he's not going to put anything other than that in his report. We found that just totally absurd. The ground was frozen, and it was just impossible for that to happen.
Then the airmen remembered that the object they'd seen was triangular. They measured the distance between the indentations and discovered that they formed a perfect triangle. The activities soon came to the attention of the Deputy Base Commander, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt.
Well, it's the aliens I feel sorry for. I wouldn't want a close encounter of any kind with Burroughs.
Who's been having close encounters?
Sir. Well, I guess you could say we were having a few Christmas festivities.
Oh, yeah?
Well, Burroughs and Peniston said they were out chasing a UFO in the forest.
Are you serious?
Well, that's what they said.
Has anybody confirmed it wasn't an aircraft?
Not that I know of.
Whatever they saw, I want it in the log.
Okay.
I personally knew the individuals that had reported it, and I knew they were very credible people. I was sure something had happened. There was obviously something. I certainly wasn't convinced it was a UFO, but I didn't know what it was.
There was only one way to find out. Huge portable floodlights, known as light-alls, were rigged in the forest, ready for anything which might appear the next night. But as darkness fell, the light-alls began to malfunction. Lieutenant Colonel Holt was interrupted at a Christmas dinner.
The duty flight lieutenant came in, and he was quite shaken and insisted upon speaking myself and the base commander about a matter of utmost urgency. He said, "It's back." And I said, "What's back?" And he said, "The UFO is back." I assembled a small team of experts, and we set off in the forest really to debunk it.
About 30 men followed the lights into the forest, armed with special equipment, including a night vision scope, Geiger counter, and a tape recorder.
Right, this way.
I'm certainly glad we made the tape, because if we hadn't made the tape, even I would have trouble believing what happened that night.
But would anyone else believe them?
Right, this way.
It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. It's brighter than it has been. Yeah. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
All three batteries we were using were intermittent and did not work properly that night.
But other equipment was working. A scope, Geiger counter, and a tape recorder. The sound in this reconstruction is taken from the actual tape they claim to have recorded that night.
There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. It's brighter than it has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
It pulsated as though it were an eye winking at you. And around the edges, it appeared to have molten metal dripping off it, just like falling to the ground. But I didn't see any evidence of anything on the ground. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. None of us could. Here I am, a senior official that routinely denies this sort of thing and diligently works to debunk them, and I'm involved in the middle of something that I can't explain.
The Geiger counter was measuring levels 25 times normal background radiation.
Just jumped up to 7/10 there. 7/10 right there in the center? Uh-huh. We're getting very positive readings. You're getting readings on the tree you're taking samples from? Where clicks max. That's the strongest point on the tree? Yes, sir.
The night vision scope showed strange readings too.
We're picking up heat reflection off the trees. Looking directly overhead, one can see an opening in the trees plus some freshly broken pine branches on the ground underneath. Looks like some of them came off about 15 to 20 feet up.
The men stayed in pursuit through the woods for 6 hours.
The object suddenly exploded, a silent explosion, and broke into 3 to 5 white objects and rapidly disappeared.
A mile away, Airman John Burroughs was with the broken-down light-alls.
All of a sudden, out of the distance, a blue light streaked past us. Passing the light-alls, they came on. They passed through the open window on the truck, going off into the distance, and the light-alls went out.
As we moved out of the forest, we noticed 3 objects in the sky. The objects in the sky were moving about, sharp, angular movements, very high speed.
It's as if it's looking for something.
On the radio, I'm calling the command post.
Thunder, this is Stopper. Call radar and ask them what they've got 30 degrees above the horizon and 10 miles out.
I wanted to know if they were finding anything on the radar scope. One of the objects in the sky was sending down beams of light, beams of energy. I'm not sure what they were. But at the same time, I could hear on the radio voices talking about the beams coming down on the base.
Then a beam shone straight at them.
At this stage, my skepticism had definitely disappeared. I was really in awe.
Almost as rapidly as it appeared, it went. An extraordinary story. But what could be behind it? Some of what the airmen saw can be explained, astronomers say, by a rare coincidence of events in the sky that night.
One of these was the re-entry of a Russian rocket. This came in and burnt up in the Earth's atmosphere. It was seen by thousands of eyewitnesses all over southeastern England. And the second was a brilliant natural fireball, a piece of interplanetary rock burning up in the atmosphere.
Another astronomer thinks further confusion was caused by a third factor, a lighthouse on the nearby coast.
Although it's 6 miles away, it only looks as though it's a few hundred yards away in between the trees. And as the airmen moved around, the lighthouse beam too would have appeared to move in between the trees and retreated in front of them as they moved forward, which is exactly the way they described it.
That theory was backed up when the tape was played against the flashing of the lighthouse.
Right on this position here, straight ahead in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there, sir. There it is. Yeah, I see it too.
The two matched. But the Americans were well aware of the lighthouse and say that wasn't what they saw.
A lighthouse doesn't move through the forest. The lighthouse doesn't go up and down, it doesn't explode, doesn't change shape, size, doesn't send down beams of light from the sky.
The Rendlesham Forest encounters became the talk of the airbase. Lieutenant Colonel Halt knew he had to act.
I really didn't know quite how to handle it. I reported it to my superior, and I was quite concerned, to be honest with you, what his reaction would be. But he was very supportive.
He was told to write a memo to the British Ministry of Defence.
Including the undersigned.
I sent the memo, but I never heard. I kept checking and asking, but I never got a response.
But other airmen say secret investigations were taking place.
After the incident happened, there seemed to be some strange activity going on in the base. I'm really not sure what it was, but it wasn't normal activity.
At that time, we noticed that there was many unscheduled flights coming in. They told me that I was supposed to keep it quiet and not to take the issue any farther.
According to a former U.S. military intelligence officer, the flights were ordered by his colleagues.
There's a total blackout of any information leaving the base. Even the senior officials on the base were not told about these flights coming in and leaving. These flights contained teams of specialists. They were to gather specific data in their fields of expertise. All of that information then was to be sent to Washington, D.C., where it would be assessed and accumulated in a finalized, highly classified report.
Whatever conclusions may have been reached, Lieutenant Colonel Halt wasn't told. He's mystified as to why, as a senior officer, his report never even received a reply.
To this day, I'm very puzzled why nobody ever came back and asked for additional information, asked questions, or even interviewed me. It doesn't really add up.
But news of the sightings began to leak out. Local investigators began to take matters into their own hands.
We asked the local people if they'd heard anything and seen anything, and most of the local people said that they'd seen the lights over the forest.
A few days later, though, they seemed less forthcoming.
They'd all been told to keep quiet, and two of the local people who lived near the airbase told us originally what they'd seen from their bedroom window, and then when we went back they'd got MOD property private keep out, and they'd got barriers around the house.
The local investigators managed to get a copy from the US government of the Deputy Commander's memo. In Britain, it prompted a question in Parliament.
I have seen the memorandum to which my honourable friend refers. I'm ready to give information about any such reported sightings that are found to be a matter of concern from a defence standpoint, but there have been none to date.
The case intrigued Lord Hill Norton, a former Chief of Staff at the Ministry of Defence.
One can't help feeling that something is being concealed. Either the Americans and indeed the Deputy Base Commander were hallucinating, or they believed that something had landed there and they had taken photographs and records of it. And in either event, it must be of interest to the defence of the United Kingdom.
Sergeant Jim Peniston is not only convinced by what he saw then, a cover-up could explain what he says happened after he left the US Air Force.
As time went by, a year or two, I had noticed that my mail was being tampered with, opened and resealed, and we also got to the one point where we found a listening device within my home.
Soon after the stories surrounding the Suffolk Air Bases surfaced, a large swathe of Rendlesham Forest was cut down, locals believe because of the radiation left behind.
When we asked why the trees were cleared so quickly, we were told because of the traces that were left on them. And we tried to find out who'd taken the trees away. No, we were told that they were just taken.
The air bases have gone too. With the end of the Cold War, the Americans left. But the mystery won't go away.
The Ministry have doggedly denied that anything untoward occurred there, and I simply don't believe it. Therefore, somebody, I don't know who it is sitting on information which by now should be public.
If a secret report is in Washington, what could it contain? The former intelligence officer claims he knows.
That finalized report concluded that real objects were seen, that these objects were a result of a highly evolved advanced technology The technology was so advanced that we cannot to this day replicate it. That there was an intelligence involved, and that intelligence did not originate on Earth.
And according to the radar operator who first saw an object, it's far from being the only UFO incident.
These things are being picked up by radar operators throughout the whole world, not just in Britain. And we're not told what they are, and we're not expected to ask questions about what they are.
The Ministry of Defence admits they have more than 8,000 cases of UFOs on file. As for Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, although he never heard any more about his UFO report, it didn't, as he'd feared, damage his career. Soon afterwards, he was promoted from Deputy Commander to Commander of the airbase. Rather strange, you might think, if he'd been suspected of not telling the truth. We're going undercover now, but see you again soon. Good night.
On the Paranormal Channel.
Welcome to a new series of Strange But True. We shall start as we mean to go on, with stories of ordinary people who find themselves caught up in extraordinary, inexplicable events. Later tonight, we'll be talking to a man who vividly recalls being shot by a Russian soldier in 1855. But we start with the subject that generated an enormous amount of interest in our first series. Faith healer Lorraine Ham works alongside GPs at her local clinic. Her patients think she's working wonders. Until next time, good night.
The response to the last programme was enormous. The credits hadn't gone up before the phone started to ring. By the Monday, letters were pouring in. Before the end of the week, the postman was actually bringing them in sacks.
Lorraine was overwhelmed by more than 20,000 letters. With the help of other healers, she began the long process of answering them all. One letter was from Christine Drake, who was desperate for help, but not for herself.
And the second son, Reese, is now...
I was watching Strange But True with my daughter Alison, and after the programme had finished, I thought I would contact Lorraine Ham to see if she could alleviate my daughter's pain.
I played football with the lads in my class 4 or 5 times a day for anything up to an hour sometimes.
They'll never win. They will, they always win. No, they won't. Come on, we're going to be late for school.
Pain in my back was so bad I started crying with it.
We had to put her to bed straight away, and we hoped that she would get better, but after a couple of days we had to take her to hospital.
Alison came to us complaining of chronic lumbar pain. This apparently was due to a stress fracture indicated here. These fractures cause considerable pain and inhibit spinal movement. I referred her to the Regional Specialist Spinal Centre for treatment and advice.
These small stress fractures seem to be causing the problem. The difficulty we face is that there's always a risk operating in the spinal area.
Can you do anything for her?
Well...
But she's in so much pain.
I'm afraid that at her age, it's just not worth the risk to do an operation.
What am I supposed to do?
Unfortunately, wait. We'll have to see how it develops. The best thing is to wait until you stop growing. Then it'll heal itself in time.
To be told that they couldn't do anything, well, just devastated.
Alison was only a teenager, and yet she was living the life of an elderly lady, almost a pensioner. She was going backwards and forwards to seeing specialists and doctors, and she just wasn't getting any better at all.
After suffering intense pain for 4 years, their best hope seemed to be Lorraine Ham.
When I found out my mum had actually written off to Lorraine Ham, I was surprised and hopeful.
Oh, I can see it's a bit painful.
When Alison first came to see me, she was in pain
close your
with her
eyes.
back.
Relax.
And I did healing work with her there and then.
I had my eyes closed and I could feel warm on the areas that she was healing.
Now I'm just going to put my hand under your waist.
A sensation of all that pain drifting away.
When I say open your eyes, open your eyes.
The session over, Alison and Christine went home.
When the warmth had gone and the pain had gone with it, and I could move around without any pain, it just felt brilliant.
I thought it was marvellous. I thought it was a miracle. Alison was doing things that she couldn't do before, and I'd got my daughter back.
I phoned Christine and she told me that Alison was now doing PE and feeling much better. And did she need to come and see me again? And of course I said no.
Good pass! I had the feeling of having my life back to normal, and I felt like a normal person again, for the first time since I'd had the accident.
Out of the mountains of letters received every day, Lorraine spotted one written on Oldham Football Club headed paper. Nicola Fleming had written to her on behalf of her injured husband, Craig. Craig's career was rising fast. He commanded a regular first-team place and played against Manchester United in the 1994 FA Cup semi-final.
In a frustrating day so far for Mark Hughes. He's been very well watched by Craig Fleming.
Rumours were spreading that United were interested in buying the young Oldham star. Everything was going right. And then disaster struck.
I was playing and just getting the odd niggling deep in the groin and round the hip. Gradually it just got worse and worse as I played. I was playing about 60 minutes. That was when I was shot.
When it actually crept upon us that he couldn't play football anymore because the injury was so bad, he was just devastated and depressed.
It was obvious to us that he was never going to overcome these problems unless he had surgery.
Craig was sent for an operation to repair a torn abdominal muscle.
I was getting a shooting pain across the top of the abdomen. And that cleared that up, but I was still left with this pain in the groin and the hip.
This was a tremendous blow to the club because they had anticipated that he would, after this initial surgery, be back into the fray again.
He was just so fed up because he couldn't do anything about it.
Craig returned for a second operation, hoping it would clear his problems. It didn't.
I had the operation to release the tendon. I mean, that's released a lot of the pressure in there. There was still a pain. Specialists were saying that it wasn't a career-threatening injury, but, after 3 or 4 months you naturally start worrying about, how serious is it?
So when we heard about Lorraine Ham, we thought, well, why not give it a go?
Craig finally got to see Lorraine.
I'd like to lie down.
He was obviously concerned because he wasn't able to play football.
Just relax.
If you're out for any length of time, there are other people coming up and taking your place. So on a mental, emotional level, there's always that worry, if you like.
I couldn't see what Lorraine was doing because I obviously had my eyes closed.
Now I'm going to touch your leg.
I got like a strange tingling sensation. It just felt like a strong, very strong pins and needles.
Stretch your fingers and your toes.
I was expecting it,
When I say
to be pins and needles, but as soon as I got and opened my eyes, it just disappeared. I've never experienced anything like it before.
Lorraine told Craig to go home and relax for the weekend.
I arrived at the club on Monday, went down to the physio room as usual.
Right, Craig, show what you can do under your own steam.
I was a bit reluctant to try it at first. I let it go all the way down. Brought it back up and again it was no pain at all.
No pain?
No.
Really?
It's fine, yeah, no pain. So and then I was just doing them all day. I was flabbergasted by it.
Very impressive. The rest there. It was certainly exciting for all of us to realise that Craig was more enthusiastic, able to do more, and in fact looking forward to his training for a change.
Propulsion. Go on, up in the air. That's it. Go on.
Craig was improving, And it's quite exhilarating, and who cares what produces the result?
Now it's like, oh great, can't wait till next season. He's just so much happier, so much brighter about it all, and it's easy to live with.
Didn't know the physio had been to see the surgeons. I'm absolutely convinced that Lorraine was the reason behind this pain going.
Skeptics of healing would say that all healers do is help people who already believe. But Lorraine is sure that her healing powers go further than that.
A person who is positive about his healing can improve more quickly than someone who isn't. But yet healing can still work with someone who is quite sceptical.
Lorraine also believes she can heal patients without them actually having to be there. This was the answer to the thousands of needy letters. And so the National Healing Centre in Shrewsbury was set up, and from here, absent healing is sent out.
We now have a network of healers all over the country who meditate regularly 3 times a day, and we focus on all the people who have written or telephoned and asked for help.
One such person was Ruth Dorrington, who'd badly hurt her hip.
I'm quite a serious club runner, and I train every day. So when I got injured, I had to cut my training right down. I was getting more frustrated, more depressed about not running properly and not racing.
I wrote to as many people as I could and informed them that I'd put them on an absent healing list. Ruth was one of those people.
In her letter, Lorraine told Ruth she would be on the list for 6 weeks.
It did seem that suddenly progress was all in the right direction, and for once I could actually think that I was going to recover completely. At the end of the 6-week period, I felt like I'd reached a stage where I could get back into a proper training schedule and race seriously. Being on the healing list was important, and I don't think it was like a psychosomatic thing. I thought, if there's lots of healers, then all that energy's got to be good, got to heal me, and it seemed to do the trick.
Ruth came out of her injury running better than ever. In fact, she broke several club records, and she believes it's all thanks to Lorraine Ham. The question that must be asked is, would Lorraine's patients have got better anyway? Reincarnation is an accepted part of several religions, and many individuals under hypnosis believe they're able to explore these past lives. Unfortunately, much of what they recount is uncheckable, and it's tempting to see more fantasy than fact in their vivid recollections of the great events of world history. But tonight's story is different. The past life in question turned out to be the life of an ordinary but well-documented individual. If there is any truth in reincarnation, then what you are about to see may well be the real thing.
Time has stopped. There's no more time. Time, like everything else in the universe, runs in circles. We've reached the top of the circle, and now we're going back in time. You're drifting back in time. You're seeking memories. Memories of things that happened to you before you were born, in another time.
This is the story of Ray Bryant and his extraordinary journey into his past. He believes that under guided hypnosis, he can go back in time to past lives led hundreds of years ago.
Here at last is some sort of proof that there's something beyond.
I've been looking into past life memory cases for the last 20 years, and Ray Bryant's case stands out as one of the very best because there is such a wealth of evidence.
It all began in this unremarkable suburban home in Hertfordshire. Ray Bryant, a journalist, had come to research past life experiences. Andrew Selby welcomed him to join the regular regression group held in his living room.
The number of people in the group when Ray first started coming was around 12 to 15. It was quite a number of months before Ray started regressing properly and anything significant happened.
Leading the group was hypnotherapist Joe Keaton, who's led thousands of people into their past lives. Soon, the first tantalizing clue was to emerge.
I want you to go back to the time before you were born. Keep drifting back. You're there now.
After hypnotizing Ray, Joe began asking questions.
Where are you? What are you doing?
Crimea. Fighting.
What's your name?
Reuben.
Reuben who?
Reuben Starr.
As with many past life regressions, that vital detail, a full name, was missing. But Andrew Selby was intrigued. His diligent research was to open the door to Ray's past life.
I was down in the Guildhall Library. I'm trying to research on another regression. I was getting nowhere with it. So I thought I'd change over and see if I could find something on this soldier. Well, I looked in the index and there I found a book on the casualty roll of the Crimea. And it was all listed by regiments.
The chances of Selby finding a full name to match the fragment given under hypnosis seemed highly remote.
I turned over the pages and I nearly fell off my chair. There, right in front of me, was Reuben Stafford, a sergeant who'd fought in the Crimean. I just couldn't believe it.
One of the difficulties in assessing the evidence of past life memories is that individuals often recall being famous people or having lived lives that are well documented. The quite remarkable case of Ray Bryant is that he's remembering an individual who was so obscure that it was almost impossible to prove he lived, but that evidence eventually came to light.
Armed with Reuben's full name, Andrew Selby began the painstaking business of piecing together the soldier's life. He discovered that he'd signed up aged 20, that he'd been wounded in the attack on the quarries, and his discharge papers stated that he'd been a very good soldier.
We've got a lot of information here about Reuben. What are you going to tell him?
Nothing. It's a chance to test him out. If he is this young soldier, then he'll remember the details anyway, won't he?
For Keaton, this would prove to be one of the most important past life sessions he'd ever led. Would Ray Bryant know the final part of Reuben's surname?
I want you to go back to the year 1855. It is 1855. Bring out your memories. What's your name and rank? Hey, you! What's your name and rank?
My name's Stafford, Sergeant, 47th Lancashire Regiment of Foot. 7th Lancashire Regiment of Foot.
The group was astounded.
I have never researched into the Crimea. It's not a subject that has interested me. And I have no army background in my family at all.
So if Ray didn't know anything about the Crimea, where did the identity of that obscure foot soldier come from? Richard Wiseman, a psychologist, believes the explanation may lie with cryptoamnesia.
When we're young, we pick up far more information than we realise, information from books, films, other people. That's in our memories, but we've just forgotten about it. The hypnotist comes along, suggests we've lived a previous life, and all that information comes out. And in the right setting, the hypnotist and the subject might be able to convince each other that really is evidence of previous lives.
Where are you exactly?
Oh, we're back in camp now.
But it's hard to explain the wealth of accurate detail provided by Ray Bryant as he went on to describe the life of Reuben Stafford, a young soldier who fought the Russians far from home on the borders of the Black Sea.
We've tested him against the evidence, we've tried to trick him, and we haven't been able to break him out of the character. If Ray was acting, we'd have caught him out. If it wasn't genuine, if it was imagination, we'd have caught him out. So my belief is that we've got a genuine phenomenon here.
Where are you? In battle?
The following reconstructions are based on tapes of the actual regression sessions.
They come at us just over a little ridge.
Attacker! They're right in front of us, looking at us, hardly a rifle's length away.
Are they armed? So you have to be quick.
Quicker than them.
How old were they?
Just chaps like us.
What colour uniforms are the Russians wearing?
Grey. The grey ghosts. Just come and go. They know the country.
It's very much like a dream, but this time you are conscious all the time and you're watching the action. You know what that dream is leading to.
Keaton was intrigued by Reuben's injury to his left hand. Records show he was injured in the Battle of the Quarries in 1855. Ray was still ignorant of the details, but would he recall them under hypnosis?
Is this a good day to talk to you?
Keep up, keep up. Wait for the order. Advance!
The attack on the quarries on the 7th of May 1855 was part of the Battle of Sebastopol. It took the lives of hundreds of British troops.
I had this sudden sensation in the hand. I couldn't imagine what was happening because while I was aware that something had happened to that hand, I could feel no pain. And yet I knew that Reuben was experiencing pain.
Joe was so concerned at Ray's state that he moved him on in time.
It's later now. You're not in the quarry now. It's later that night. Where are you?
I don't know what happened. I got shot by Russians.
Who's looking after you?
Florrie's ladies. They have aprons and caps. White caps.
How long have you been there, in the war?
1 year. 1 year now.
Are you missing home?
I miss my wife and Bobby. They write to me. She says all's well.
Well, that's the main thing, isn't it?
Aye.
Andrew Selby's researchers didn't finish with the war. He pursued Reuben Stafford through the 19th century, but no trace was found until the last day of his life. A death certificate provided the last vital piece of evidence with which to test Ray Bryant. Reuben Stafford had ended up as a lighterman on the Thames, alone, his family gone. A forgotten soldier, down on his luck. Joe Keaton decided to take Ray back to the day of Reuben's death.
It's the 2nd of April, 1879. Where are you?
I'm looking down into water. It's welcoming. Calm.
With no clues, Bryant had accurately reconstructed the last moments of Reuben Stafford's life and death. Violent suffocation by drowning. A suicide.
Just for the record, believers in reincarnation now reckon you are reborn about 50 years after you die. We'll be back after a gap of precisely 1 week. Good night.
Good evening. Before the dawn of recorded time, scientists believe, there existed a land bridge between the North American continent and Asia, where the Bering Sea now flows. It's across this land that Native Americans are thought to have migrated from the east. During their trek, did those early settlers intrude on the territory of a mystical creature which still inhabits thousands of square miles of forest from northern California to Canada? This beast crops up again and again in Native American mythology and has many names. Buckwas, Oma, and Sasquatch are just a few. But you and I know it as Bigfoot.
Impenetrable woodland covers vast areas of the Pacific Northwest. Sparsely populated and largely unexplored, the region is believed by many to be the habitat of the mysterious and elusive Bigfoot, for whom the forests provide the perfect sanctuary.
It's just fascinating to think that a large bipedal hominid, hair-covered ape of some sort is wandering around in these woods around us. There certainly is enough resources to support something like that.
Todd Neese is a computer manager from Portland in Oregon and a sergeant in America's National Guard. During a training exercise in the forests, Todd had just detonated some explosives when he says he noticed movement near the blast site.
There, standing in the middle, were these three figures, very dark, almost jet black in color, standing on two legs, arms to their side, quite like a human would.
It's accounts like this which maintain the interest and curiosity of Bigfoot fans like Larry Lund.
Since I was a kid, I've always been in wonderment of things that I can't prove are there, that I haven't seen. I'm an investigator. I go out to sites where there's been sightings of the creature or tracks. A lot of it, of course, is hoaxing, and you can tell, but we do get a lot of information.
The legend of Bigfoot is so compelling that over the years, it's generated a minor industry. It's also encouraged hoaxers to make outrageous claims and falsify evidence.
Here's an example of a lot of the fakes we get. As you can see, it doesn't have a real definite foot shape. And the toes are just straight across out to here and then real wide and bulbous. Now there's one toe there, and this one appears to be missing the little toe coming up.
And the hoaxers don't stop at Bigfoot's little toes.
I want you to listen to this. This is a tape that has been sent. It's supposed to be the sound of a Bigfoot. And this is what people say they're hearing.
This is not the sound of a Bigfoot. It's a fake, recorded in a church bell tower. But there's one piece of evidence that even Larry finds persuasive. In 1967, a Bigfoot enthusiast called Roger Patterson shot this remarkable piece of film in Bluff Creek, California.
It shows this creature walking away from Roger Patterson as he filmed. He runs behind it.
Patterson claims he'd filmed a female Bigfoot.
As she turned, you can really see that it is a female creature then, because she has large pendulous breasts. And as she disappears, you can still see the movement of the skin. You can see the muscle tone. I'm convinced this is a real creature.
The following day, Patterson returned to Bluff Creek and took what he claims were casts of footprints made by the Bigfoot.
A somewhat normal-looking human-type foot. Toes are displayed just about right, nice angle, a nice flat heel here with no outrageous lines in it. So, since we do have the film and these were cast by people the next day, we believe these are real.
The Patterson film has always aroused controversy. Its supporters point to the fact that in 30 years, nobody has confessed to a hoax. They also claim that no one at the time would have had the skills to fake it.
Several of the movie people and their special effects have looked at this film. They said, Larry, if back then, 1967, not possible.
1,000 miles to the north lies Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It's surrounded by numerous smaller islands where dense forest extends to the shoreline. For centuries, these islands have been home to Native Americans. Village Island, now long since abandoned, was the birthplace of Tom Seawid. For him and his tribe, the legend of Bigfoot, or Bukwus as they call the creature, is part of folklore.
My people at Bogyoth have always believed in a being that inhabits this area. Now the Bukwus is said to be a large hair-covered giant that you can see on the beaches when you're out clam digging on low tide. And many of our legends and dances are about the Bukwus.
4 years ago, Tom and a friend took a boat trip around the deserted islands off the Vancouver coast.
Just as it got dark, I started calling for wolves to see if I'd get an answer from them. To my surprise, I got a call from the beach, but it wasn't wolves. It was a whistling, whooping sort of noise. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And at the same time, a really bad smell came drifting towards my boat. We saw something move, a shadow come out of the bush. And right there, the first thing I noticed was this great creature, like a human covered in hair, just boom. I was amazed because he'd done the same posturing that I'd been taught when I used to dance the Bukwus for my grandfather.
Tom says he and his friend watched in amazement until the creature finally strode off down the beach.
Bukwus I knew about as a creature that ate cockles and clams on the beaches and was shy of humans. You know, I've grown up with the legends. I guess I had my doubts, but after that night, no doubts.
Did Tom really see a Bigfoot that night? Skeptics believe there is a simple explanation. The witnesses have been confusing Bukwus or Sasquatch with wild bears, common to the region. This theory is rejected by wildlife biologist Dr. John Bindernagel, who has studied hundreds of sightings.
Sasquatch differs from a bear actually in several ways, although superficially there's a similarity. If we look at a Sasquatch, just the outline, it has a much shorter neck, long legs, and in profile, a very flat face. A bear, by comparison, has a very prominent snout, has very sloping or tapered shoulders, and has very short legs. And so, again, although there is this superficial similarity, it doesn't bear any serious analysis.
One day in July 1985, the Bradshaw family from Washington State went on a camping trip deep into the woods.
We had heard that there was a sighting of Sasquatch in the North River area and decided that we were going to go out and check it out.
Yeah, we hunting as well as fishing here?
You can't be too careful. It was a beautiful day down there, but yet there was an eeriness to it. It was just something that wasn't quite right.
Fred and his son Rick went off to the river to fish, leaving Carol behind at the campsite.
There was just total stillness. And the stillness does make you wonder, because you have a feeling when you're in the woods that there is something watching.
At dusk, Fred and Rick returned to the campsite to join Carol for dinner.
I decided, well, we'd get some sleep.
Don't stay up too late, Rick. You want to get ahead.
And then we'd get up later in the night, and then we'd go look around at night, because these creatures seem to roam more at night.
What the heck was that? All of a sudden, there was just this big, loud, like a big limb had fallen.
Sounded like a tree came down in the middle of camp.
I don't know, maybe it's just a bear or cougar or something.
Over there.
A weird feeling hit me, kind of the back of the spine over the top of the head. And I said, Dad, do you see what I see?
Here was this form that was standing behind a tree.
The Bradshaws claim this was no fleeting glimpse, and the creature was in their sight for several minutes before it disappeared. They're insistent it was a Bigfoot.
I saw what I saw, and I can't prove it to anyone else. You just have to have an open mind about it.
Whether Bigfoot exists or not, Larry Lund believes the phenomenon fulfills a basic human need.
I think it's the mystery of life. You need something to believe in, you know, something that you can't quite see and you can't quite touch, but that it's out there and you hope that it's there. We need our monsters.
The professor of anthropology at an American university recently called for a hunt to track and kill Bigfoot to prove its existence. If Bigfoot were found, the species' isolated life would be destroyed forever, along with a tantalizing mystery.